Okay, chapter 9. In chapter 9, we have the army retreating. They stop. However, the rear guard at times is battling Napoleon, the much larger army, but Kutuzov keeps retreating. But finally, they, by necessity, I would think, put up a stand, and they actually have a small victory. And the rumor of this victory spreads throughout the army, and it's kind of a morale booster, and their success and position perhaps is a little bit exaggerated. In Kutuzov, he likes Andrei, and he sends him on this preferential mission to go see the Austrian emperor, I believe, to tell him of the situation of the recent victory. And this is really an energizing thing for Andrei. And we'll just read a little bit about it here. It was a dark, starlit night. Reviewing his impressions of the recent engagement, happily picturing to himself the effect he would produce with his news of victory, and recalling his leave-taking from the commander-in-chief and his comrades, Prince Andrei sped along, enjoying the feelings of a man who has at last begun to attain a long-desired happiness. And I just want to spend some time this chapter just kind of comparing Nikolai Rostov with Andrei Bolkonsky. And so just as we read these things about Andrei, I just want you to keep Nikolai in mind and how they're the same in some ways but quite different in others. And so Prince Andrei is riding through the night to reach the Austrian command. And he finally gets to his destination. As he drove up to the palace, despite his rapid journey and sleepless night, Prince Andrei felt even more animated than on the previous evening. Only his eyes glittered with a feverish brilliance, and his thoughts followed one another with extraordinary speed and lucidity. Once more he vividly recalled all the details of the battle, no longer vaguely but in the definite and concise form in which he imagined himself presenting them to the Emperor of France. He imagined the casual questions that might be put to him, and the answers he would make. He expected to be presented to the Emperor at once, and he wasn't. He was ushered in to see the Minister of War. He had to wait in the waiting room, and this exhilaration that was it's really a vague thing. Like, on the one hand, we think of Andrei as this more of an intellectual fellow, but he's still driven by these sort of very vague thoughts and triggers in his mind for meaning and purpose. And here was something very invigorating, new, prestigious to send this message, and it was just giving him a life he hadn't yet had as we had seen him. And then it sort of starts falling off the rails. He's delayed, he's ushered in to see this Emperor of War, and his mind, again, it shows, we're not really in control of ourselves in as much as we think. It's his whole intuitions change. Prince Andrei's joyous feeling waned appreciably as he approached the door of the War Minister's room. He felt himself affronted, and without his being aware of it, this feeling instantly turned into one of disdain, which was quite groundless. And his fertile brain instantly suggested to him a point of view that justified his contempt. This is human psychology 101. You have an emotion, you have a feeling, you have a thought. It comes to you involuntarily, and your skilled brain comes up with a good reason why it should be there. And we bypass over the very fact that it arose involuntarily in the first place. We have so much identity with him. Nikolai, he's much more of a traditionalist. He's happy with the Russian culture, and he just doesn't want to get stuck at a desk. He wants to be in the midst of Russian patriotism, which at this time is being part of the army. And he's just it's much more clear to Nikolai where his meaning and value comes from, and it's serving his country and having his comrades not think poorly of him. He wants to be thought of as not a coward, but a hero. It's clear to Nikolai in that sense, although the fact of these emotions within him, where do they come from? Are they things he chose? It doesn't seem so. It's things that arise within him, and then he creates this story around which he can fulfill, and he struggles to do so, as we saw in the previous chapter about him fumbling on the bridge and feeling he let everyone down. He's thinking of his commander being his enemy because he might think of Rostov as being a coward. And so this is where Nikolai's sense of self is kind of struggling to find his way. With Prince Andrei, he has this much more kind of ineffable, grand sense that his life needs to have some sort of unexplained greater meaning or purpose, or else it's all futile. And so he's a much more of a cynical person, or cynically inclined. As we can see in this situation, he's kind of excited, inspired. Finally, his life has this kind of verve that he's been searching for, and then just an interaction where he's delayed and maybe not treated with the grand introduction he was expecting, and suddenly his brain turns on him, and he quickly comes up with reasons to think poorly of the war minister. And so Andrei's struggles are they too are centered on himself finding meaning in the world, but it's much more vague to him. And in some ways, he seems more lost than Nikolai. Although it doesn't seem that Nikolai is completely very self-aware or able to guide his own ambition either. And I don't criticize these young men. Remember, these are young men. I know for myself, the story is much more interesting if I hold my criticism lightly and see these as evolving people, and especially seeing them just as people generally are. Not only does my empathy with them make the story more interesting as I think how they're sorting these things through, but in turn it brings me in to the story to sort of see these qualities within myself. Just being able to empathize with these characters. And so his fertile brain instantly suggested to him a point of view that justified his contempt. And it's just his emotions kind of going off the rails again, and he's feeling much more cynical. And finally, he sees the war minister. He says, "Okay, Emperor, why I'd like to see you, but it's not going to happen right away." And this is the last paragraph. When Prince Andrei left the palace, he felt that all the interest and happiness the victory had afforded him had now been left in the indifferent hands of the Minister of War. The whole tenor of his thoughts instantly changed, and the battle seemed to him a memory of some remote event long past. And so this change in his demeanor, it's not something he's chosen. It's something his brain has conditioned him to have these responses. And with the right trigger, he becomes cynical. He cannot find, at this point, the idea of having a meaningful life is just eluding him. And he's sort of searching in places he will never find it. With Nikolai, by comparison, he seems to have a clear idea, being a brave Cossack, doing something heroic. It's clear to him, but he's actually thrust into that situation, and then again, his good intentions are not in control. His emotion, he's overwhelmed by the situation. He's of no help whatsoever. As his comrades kind of set fire to the bridge and they go back, and he's totally depressed about the situation. And the only ray of hope is that, no one noticed how much of a lousy cadet I was in this situation, which is actually encouraging to him, because how those around him, his brothers in arms, view him is of utmost importance to him. And so we see these two young men. They're different. Prince Andrei seems to be much more of an intellectual guy. I kind of get the sense that Nikolai is very much more passionate, part of the Russian culture, a very patriotic guy. But both are struggling with what's their place in this world, and it doesn't, in neither case is it really come out articulately. I think in Nikolai's case, it seems clear to him. He thinks he knows where kind of his peace and satisfaction will come from. We'll wait and see if that's actually true. In Prince Andrei's case, it seems much more vague. You get this victory and he's given this mission, and suddenly it's kind of like, here's something exciting and kind of bigger than himself. But this ends up being futile as well, and just something else to be cynical about. So anyway, I find the comparison between these two characters a little bit interesting, and I again just invite some empathy with all the characters. I think you'll find the reading much more interesting in that way, as you wonder about, what other options could they have had? Like, what other option could Prince Andrei have had in this context? Or what other option could Nikolai have responded any differently on the bridge than, in fact, the way he did? It sort of doesn't seem that way. And so, how do people change? How do they grow? How do they stumble into new realizations? This interested me. And that was chapter 9.